Imagine this. A man dies, but his cat refuses to believe it. Every morning, without fail, this cat walks to the cemetery, carrying tiny gifts like twigs, leaves, flowers, and gently places them on his owner's grave. He sits there, waiting, staring at the tombstone as if expecting his human to return. Days turn into weeks. Weeks into months. Yet, he never stops. Some call it love. Some call it a mystery. But one thing is certain, this cat's loyalty is beyond what anyone ever imagined. His name was Toldo. And his story will stay with you forever. It all began in a small village in Italy, where an elderly man named Renzo Iazelli lived a quiet, peaceful life. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. But he had something more valuable, a heart full of kindness. One day, he found a tiny, abandoned kitten, no bigger than the palm of his hand. The kitten was weak, hungry, and alone. Most people would have walked past without a second glance. But not Renzo. He picked up the frail little creature and brought him home. He named him Toldo. And from that moment, they were inseparable. Toldo was no ordinary cat. He followed Renzo everywhere, like a little shadow that refused to leave. If Renzo sat in the garden, Toldo was right there beside him, watching the world go by. If Renzo walked to the market, Toldo trotted alongside him, tail high in the air. It was as if the kitten had decided that this man wasn't just his owner. He was family. But life has a cruel way of taking away the ones we love. One cold morning in 2011, Renzo passed away at the age of 71. The village mourned. His family grieved. But there was one soul who didn't understand why his best friend was suddenly gone. Toldo. On the day of the funeral, something strange happened. As Renzo's coffin was carried through the streets, people noticed a small figure following the procession. A cat. Silent. Focused. Heartbroken. It was Toldo. He walked with the mourners, step by step, all the way to the cemetery, as if he knew this was the final goodbye. But for Toldo, it wasn't. The next morning, Renzo's family visited the grave. And that's when they noticed something odd. A single twig rested on the tombstone. They brushed it off, thinking it was nothing. But the next day, there was another. And another. Small gifts, leaves, flowers, even scraps of plastic, kept appearing on the grave. It didn't take long to realize who was leaving them. Toldo was visiting Renzo's grave. Every single day. At first, people were amazed. A cat mourning like a human. Bringing gifts to a grave. It seemed impossible. But day after day, Toldo continued his ritual. Whether it was sunny, raining, or bitterly cold, he made the journey to the cemetery. The villagers began to take notice. Some were touched, calling him a miracle. Others were skeptical. Cats don't grieve, they whispered. It's just a coincidence. But Toldo didn't care what they thought. His loyalty was stronger than their doubts. Not everyone was kind to him, though. Some of the older villagers were superstitious. They believed a cat in a graveyard was a bad omen. They tried to chase him away, throwing stones or shouting at him to leave. But no matter how many times he was shooed, scolded, or frightened, Toldo always returned. He refused to forget. He refused to move on. Then came the winter. It was the coldest night the village had seen in years. Freezing winds howled through the streets. People stayed indoors, wrapped in blankets, warming their hands by the fire. No one thought about Toldo. No one imagined he would still go to the grave. But the next morning, there he was. Sitting in the snow, his tiny body shivering, his fur covered in frost. He had spent the entire night there, curled up beside Renzo's tombstone. Waiting. Watching. That was the moment everything changed. The villagers stopped doubting. They stopped questioning. No one could explain how or why, but one thing was clear: Toldo's love was real. People started bringing him food, blankets, even setting up shelter near the cemetery so he could rest. But Toldo didn't care about comfort. He only cared about one thing: being close to Renzo. Years passed. Toldo grew older. His once energetic steps became slower, his daily visits less frequent. Age was catching up with him. But even when he was too weak to go every day, he still tried. And then, one day, he stopped coming. No one knows exactly what happened to Toldo. Some believe he passed away peacefully, finally reuniting with Renzo in a place beyond our understanding. Others say he simply faded into the village, too tired to continue. But his story remains. Even now, years later, the people of Montagnana still remember the cat who never left his owner's side. Toldo became a symbol of something we often forget: that love isn't just a human emotion. It's deeper than that. It crosses barriers, defies logic, and sometimes, just sometimes, proves that even after death, love never truly ends. So, the next time someone tells you that cats don't care, tell them about Toldo, the cat who refused to say goodbye. Because sometimes, the purest love doesn't come from the people around us. It comes from the ones who sit beside us in silence, who follow us without question, and who wait for us long after we're gone. And maybe, just maybe, love is what keeps us connected, even when the world says it's over.